Always hard not to get pumped up when I hear that starting music, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to another exciting LinkedIn Live event. This one, Unlocking Cyber Safety, Protecting Education in the Digital Age. And before we introduce our guests, a few housekeeping items. Of course, I'm your host, Carl Hooker. I'm an educational consultant, former administrator. So I'm that person who knows that whenever they call the IT office, it's never a good phone call, right? It's always something. It's never like, great, the Wi-Fi is great, or my kid did this thing on the filter. No, it's never anything good. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before I introduce my guests, a couple other things. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view afterwards, of course, on LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter. I'm sorry, X. I got to get that right. It's still taking me a while to get that in my head. You can actually comment also if you're on any of those three platforms watching live. I see a bunch of you are on live right now. Great. Feel free to go into the comment section of either LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter. And again, you can pop in a comment. It may pop up on the show. You can ask our guests some questions. We have a lot to get through, so this is going to be a jam-packed 30 minutes. We also, again, just want to let you all know that if there is a question or something you're interested in, there's a couple of time. We may have some time at the very end, but probably not. We'll see. But again, if there's something that speaks to you, or you hear, or you have a thought on a question that I'm asking our panelists, feel free to throw that in the comments as well. Again, we want to make this as interactive as possible for you as well. And without further ado, let's invite up our guests today. We'll starting with Chris. How are you doing, Chris? Tell us who you are and what you do for a living.
Hey, Carl, I appreciate you having us. My name's Chris Irwin. I'm the CTO here at Forsyte IT. Prior to that, I spent 25 plus years in other organizations in IT, Bank of America, IBM, but most notably Microsoft, where I spent about a decade, a big chunk of that on the education team, helping education customers across the U.S. implement identity and security solutions.
And I want to take a second to also give a shout out to Microsoft. And one of the things that Chris is talking about, of course, he worked at Microsoft before. His current role made me think about this recent report. I don't know if you got the chance to see it, Chris, but the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Thoughts real quick on that? What did you get a glance at?
Scary stuff in there, man.
I know.
It's always good looking at the defense report. It changes every year. We see this stuff coming through in real time, and it's nice to get a zoomed out view where you can kind of see the whole forest, right, instead of just the trees. But it's a scary time to be a defender, but there's some great tools out there. If you do it right, you can protect yourself.
He's a pro, folks. You hear that? You hear that pitch right there? That's great. That's awesome. Let's bring up, and then of course you have a colleague, Stephanie. Come on up.
I do.
How are you doing, Stephanie?
Hi, Carl. Thanks so much for having us. We really appreciate it. We're excited to be here with you.
Stephanie is, of course, you can see her title there, Chief Growth Officer at Forsyte IT as well. And then last but not least, we also want to have a voice from someone in the field. I've been in the field of K-12, but higher ed is a whole different animal. Fabio, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for having me.
And tell us, what do you do for a living there, Fabio?
Currently, I'm the Deputy Director of Operations and Infrastructure for Sierra Community College District in California. But I've been in a K-12 and higher ed space probably for the last 15 years. So been around the block a time or two.
And tell us a little bit, just quick numbers on your institution. How big, students, staff?
Absolutely. We're about 24,000 students, and give or take on the day, about 3,000 or so employees.
Nice. So that's a good size.
And 4 separate campuses.
So you're also spread out, which is also interesting.
Correct.
Of course, you and I joked about this. We were doing kind of some pre-work on the show. Like, cybersecurity hasn't changed really in the last 10 years, right?
Right.
I mean, that's why we have so many people watching right now. Obviously,
right.
There's lots of things changing. But before we get into the things that are coming and changing, I think it's also important to kind of call out this first question. And so, what are currently like some of the most common cyber threats that we're facing in all these educational institutions? I've heard a few, but I want to hear from you guys about this. And then again, how have they evolved? Just like looking back on the past few years, what's the evolution of those cyber threats look like? From the I'm click on this link because I'm a prince from Nigeria to what we're seeing now, right? It's changing quite a bit. Let's go to Chris on this first. Chris, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think everybody's worried about the state actors, right? You're worried about Iran or somebody hacking your environment. Malware is a big deal right now. But at the end of the day, and the FBI data bears this out, the most common attack vector by far is still business compromised email. They're still phishing you to gain that entry point. It's gotten exponentially better, as you know. You mentioned the Nigerian prince, right? That was pretty easy to pick out. But if you start looking at some of the phishing emails that are coming in today, they're getting better and better. They're constantly evolving. We've seen folks getting around the email hygiene solutions and Proofpoint, Defender for Office, etc., using QR codes. Now they'll email you an attachment with a QR code, and they're trying to get you to scan it. There's some really sophisticated stuff out there, and that's just the easy stuff, right? Anybody can run those type of campaigns, which is what makes them so pervasive.
Yeah, the QR code one, that's another curveball, right? Because like you said, your text detectors aren't going to see that; it's an image. So
it really is a marriage of human intelligence and technology, right? As they come up with ways to get around the technology, we really have to lean on our end users to be able to detect that and make sure we're properly educating them.
That sounds like a similar conversation we have a lot around AI too. It's that marriage of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. Matthew Joseph joined us from YouTube. Hey there, Dr. Matt. Good to see you as well on the show. Fabio, what are your thoughts again on this question? Thinking about the current landscape, what do you see there at Sierra College and across the community college field?
No, absolutely. And a lot of it is, as Chris mentioned, it's that spam, that the way to be able to gain access to our credentials and be able to gain access to our systems from what it looks like a legitimate email. So a phishing attack or spear phishing or what it might be. QR codes, we're starting to see those come through on our site as well, which is allowing it to bypass some of our systems and filters. And also just overall just bad, because as a community college system in California, we accept 100% of our students. So we make it very easy and very open for folks to come in and create accounts, which can make it look like as an internal system. So policies and procedures are being put in place to mitigate those kinds of things, but those are just things to think about.
Yeah, having that open campus. I mean, I love that. First of all, that system is in place with California and the community college, letting all students have access to this. But you're right. It also, when you kind of diversify the amount of people that are end users, then all of a sudden you've added this complexity to your system with the users. Thank you, Emil, there for joining us as well from YouTube. Thank you for jumping in there. Let's talk now. We know that cybersecurity. Obviously, those of you watching and those of us here know the importance of it. But there are some challenges around it too, and there are roadblocks that kind of help us in education specifically from kind of enhancing what we're doing to really help with our data security and our cybersecurity. And so, Stephanie, I'm going to go to you on this one. What are some of those common roadblocks? What are some of the things that you see when you're working with institutions out there, educational institutions, that they seem to have to struggle with to overcome?
Absolutely. So this is a big one, as education has been identified as the most vulnerable industry for cyber attacks, and attacks are only getting more aggressive, intense, and creative. So we see a lot of common roadblocks that our customers are up against, in no particular order, just ones that come to mind. First would be limited resources to support of a 24/7, 365 cybersecurity practice. So access to those around-the-clock resources that are really working to identify threats, mitigate those threats, and just get to those threats, because we do know it's not a matter of if, but when. So just a lot of threats are going unseen, which is a big roadblock for these education institutions. Another one would be too many security technologies in the mix. For a lot of K-12, there are numerous technologies that overlap, and it just gets confusing to manage, update, and just really staff the resources that you need to make sure that those updates are made, because truly it's not enough just to have a security technology, but it's really how you're managing that and tweaking that as you go. A third and a really big one for us is letting end users, such as students, decide whether some critical security measure is rolled out, such as multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA, to a lot of us. And so I know a lot of K-12 leaders get pushback, and we hear that a lot, but just making sure that you really educate the end user as to why that's the case, why we're really pushing for things like MFA, and getting their buy-in for adoption for those critical vulnerabilities. And then lastly, I would just say K-12 leaders not prioritizing cybersecurity in favor of other items.
There's so many initiatives thrown at us in leadership in
Yeah.
K-12 and in higher ed, I would imagine, Fabio. But how do you make that a priority? That's a whole nother thing. We need to talk about that in a minute as well. But let's talk about those roadblocks. What are you seeing there at Sierra College? What are some of the things that you struggled with? I know Stephanie mentioned, a little bit about staffing and funding. I mean, I think those are the big ones that are kind of rolling around our heads right now. What have you noticed and experienced there?
Right. And just to piggyback off of Stephanie, those are the two main ones. It's our staffing and funding. But the other one is being able to talk to the leadership and making them understand that there are other things such as security, such as MFA and other applications or other tool sets that we can use to be able to better protect ourselves. So with that said, is having that backing from that C-suite, from the CEO, from the different levels of the organizations at the leadership level to be able to implement such tools and be able to have that backing. Because as we all know, when we start shifting how somebody does things on a day-to-day basis, that's when we get that pushback, especially from the IT department, from the staffs, from staffing, the teachers, the faculty, and also the students, because it could be perceived as a roadblock for the student to be able to succeed in their educational journey. So the importance that comes from the top down as well, not just from the IT level, is huge.
That's
Having
such a
the whole organization on board.
That's such a big thing, because I've always just discovered that it seems like teachers and students seem to think that IT is here to make their lives more miserable, right? Like, let's make it harder on our teachers. We're not ever trying to do that, obviously, but I do think it's something to think about when you think about that balance of convenience versus security, and I think that's a tricky thing too. Yeah, this is an interesting one, Gabriel. This is, that's true. She brings up from LinkedIn, schools rolled out two-factor and then banned cell phones. So you're sitting there going, like, there's a balance.
What do you do?
Right? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah.
What have you seen with that, Chris?
MFA is difficult, particularly in K-12. There's a balance. Most of the time when we're working with K-12s, we kind of try and find the line where you can start enforcing that MFA, whether that's middle school, high school. Typically, we'll pick a grade level. We know that the vast majority of students have phones with them at some point, and so that's what we would try and use to help them segment it. But you still get half of your user population that's not using MFA, and you can't expect kindergartners to do that. So, that's tough. And real quick, I just want to circle back and make one point on the funding. Any K-12s that are unaware, there's some changes potentially to the E-rate funding. Now, I think they're going to pump another $200 million to help with the advanced cybersecurity stuff. So it used to be capped at basic services, and they're going to expand that. So if you're a K-12 and you're struggling for funding, which I know you all are, start taking a look. Now's the time to get prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to mix up the questions a little bit here, because I think this actually gets to another question we're about to bring up. And Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to kind of piggyback on that.
Okay.
You mentioned the diversity of different software and resources that students and schools are using to really help with cybersecurity. Well, all of those come at a price, and if you're staffing somebody too, how do we get the budget for all of this stuff? So Chris just mentioned E-rate funding, which has become available. What are some other ideas out there for budget? Because it seems like with leadership, we're all trying to get a cut of that pie that's ever shrinking sometimes, and so to make ours the most important priority is always tricky when you're thinking about all the other things that a school has to deal with. So what are your thoughts on that for budget around cybersecurity?
That's exactly right. So when you talk K-12, you're always talking budgets. Budgets will always come up, and we're always trying to figure out ways to help extend the budgets, make the most of the money that they do have, and then certainly go and find money elsewhere that they can utilize. So Chris did mention E-rate for short. It's a schools and libraries program called E-rate, and E-rate just added cybersecurity services as one of its funded services. So that was a big deal. Previously, it was just more of that telecommunications or collaboration type infrastructure software. So I think that's a big one. Federal grant dollars are really big. State programs and contracts. I know we try to be on as many state programs and contracts as we possibly can to help alleviate that, and just pre-negotiate rates, to help with budgetary constraints. Microsoft funding is a big one. As a Microsoft partner, we run funded workshops, assessments, and those types of things, just to try to help offset some of the cost there that maybe a school would incur.
And Fabio, I know you've talked about adding staff, for this, but again, finding the funds for that is tricky. And some institutions are smaller; they maybe can't afford that. How
Correct.
do you effectively kind of imagine your budget with all of this when you're talking about 4 different spread out campuses, all these different users coming into your system?
Right, and that's a great point. I mean, there is things that in California, for example, Prop 98 was something that was brought to us that gave us some dollars to spend. And like for K to 12, where you have E-rate, we have something called HERF funding, which is Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, that we were able to do some leverages, not just for the security, but also other IT infrastructure. But really, we heavily rely on third-party vendors such as Forsyte to be able to provide that 24/7 SOC operation support as an extension of my team. I cannot staff a SOC 24/7, 365. So we do rely on third-party vendors that we have a high level of trust in to be able to help us and work and being able to remain operational even when my team is sleeping.
Yeah, that is important. I mean, we do at some point have to rest. And as much as IT is seen to be 24/7. I mean, you got to have some way of outsourcing some of that. And I think anyone who's on this call, I know I've seen some people popping up in the chat that are watching or listening to this. You're probably thinking like, how does my institution handle all this 24/7, 365 without that type of support? I think that's important to think about because it's not just about the implementation of something, right? A lot of times it's a follow up, it's that management. So it's one thing to say, okay, we brought in a consultant, they help us put this new program in place. It's going to help us with our cybersecurity. And now, it's what do we call it? A free puppy, right? It's a gift with a tail. It just it continues to kind of go and grow. So thinking about that, what are some things that institutions can consider when you're adding platforms? And Fabio, we'll go to you on this, back to you on this one. When you're thinking about adding platforms, because it's in some cases it's going to take more than just one, obviously, to kind of help really have that cohesive infrastructure to help with cybersecurity. So what are the things you're thinking about specifically kind of around implementation and then management after the fact?
Right. No, that's a great question. So one thing I always tell my just overall the folks that are here at Sierra College, we're only as strong as the weakest link, right? So one of the things that we really need to focus on is staff development and be able to do that training and being able to make everyone aware of what is out there, what are these criminal organizations are trying to get from us. We are, as we all know, institutions like educational institutions, we have a plethora of PI information, and that has a value to these folks outside that are trying to access those types of data. So training. I cannot stress that enough to where it is such um, an important thing that we need to focus on, making everyone aware of it.
Yeah, and I think that's
Of
I'm
what's out
going to
there.
bring that up as a follow-up question because I do think that's important what you're pointing out there, that the staff development, the training of the staff, because those are your end users that are also somewhat your points of vulnerability. Chris, your thoughts on this idea of implementation and management? You're a solution provider, so you come into schools, you help with that. What is your kind of, and then you also have the Microsoft background from before. So what's your
It,
thoughts around that whole balance of implementation
it's
management?
it doesn't matter what vendor you're using, right? It can be as easy to deploy as you want. None of it is set it and forget it, right? The threats are constantly changing. The tools need to be tweaked and modified on a regular basis as new threats come out. And that's quite honestly where a lot of organizations struggle. They've purchased the software, whether they've got A3 plus security, A5, or they've purchased some point solutions, Proofpoint, et cetera. And a lot of times they don't even know what they have, or they've purchased it and they haven't rolled it out. And then they'll bring a consultant in, as you mentioned, Carl, and we'll get it deployed, and then they just kind of leave it alone. Well, you can't do that. You got to look at all the alerts that are coming in. You've got to tune that system, and it's constantly going to be changing. That's one of the things we're able to help orgs with, and really tie that back to the previous question. How do you save money? Vendor consolidation is a way, leveraging the tools you've already invested in, and then even outsourcing. Although it sounds like it's counterintuitive, to Fabio's point, he doesn't have 8 guys to support a 24/7 SOC, right? So if you outsource it, you spend some money on that, but it ends up saving you in the long run and providing better protection for you.
Yeah, and I think thinking about again the staffing part of that too, which adds a whole nother layer to this. But I mean, having that 24/7 support again brought it up, and I want to point out a couple things that Phil mentioned also on the YouTube channel here. He talked about the FCC has now got those E-rate dollars. Of course, the pilot's beginning next funding year. He said that only the district accepting the pilot will have access to those funds at the beginning. So thank you, Phil, for that. Yeah, it's going to be tricky. So if the FCC determines a success, and hopefully they'll open it up to everybody. So it's, got to get in on those pilots sometimes to grab a hold of those dollars. But I know that Stephanie mentioned a few other funding sources. That is the good news, is there are some funding sources out there. And then to go back with what Chris just said, consolidation and maybe dropping out of a couple. Maybe we overinvested in too many things. Maybe we cut back a little bit on a couple, or maybe two systems are doing the same thing. There's a little bit too redundant in that sense.
We see that all the time, right? They've purchased, maybe they purchased A5, it came on a state contract or something, and then they've gone out and they've bought individual security solutions. And when you start talking to them, and they don't even realize that they own all these other security tools, and it's like, guys, you could save enough money to cover your SOC service and then some by consolidating.
Yeah,
you just got to be smart with your money.
And that's exactly what we did. Sorry, Carl, but that's exactly what we did here at Sierra. It's we had many different solutions that were disaggregated, right? We didn't have that correlation also of the data time from one security solution to another, and we weren't able to see what was going on really deep down in the back till we were able to implement Guardian. We were able to implement the A5 security suite with all that data ingestion, and ultimately have somebody like Forsyte that helped us put it together.
Yeah, streamlining so important.
And streamlining it.
That single pane of view.
I think the other thing I just thought of that we kind of haven't hit yet, and that is, I think, again, all of us on this call agree it's important. How do we get leadership, or how do we get a seat at the table to make leadership realize that it's a priority? Like, what do we, it's one of those things like, well, the fire's off in the distance, but when it's in your backyard, then all of a sudden, a little more of alert. Fabio, have you had any experience with that? Like, how do you get your people say, like, hey, it's important, I need a full-time cybersecurity person on campus?
Absolutely. And that's that can be a challenge in certain organizations. Luckily, we had a leadership that was pretty receptive and understanding, especially with how the landscape has been so quickly changing in the security realm, to where they are. It's almost like, seeing the writing on the wall, right? It's only, like as Stephanie mentioned, is a matter of when, not if, something is going to happen. So let's put our best foot forward and be able to protect ourselves. So luckily, we're fortunate enough to have a leadership that, once explained, they bought into it, and been able to bring in a third party to help us solidify.
I think in some ways your role, Fabio, becomes that of a translator too, because a lot of leadership, right? They hear the word SOC and all of these things, MDDR and MFA and all whatever stuff we get thrown at them. All of a sudden they're like, wait, I don't even know what this is about. Chris and Stephanie, really quick on that question about leadership. In organizations you're working with, is there a trick to kind of making sure that the leadership is aware? Because I feel like as IT, we're always trying to fight for those dollars. Is there some sort of idea or strategy that you've seen out there that's been useful?
Yeah,
I don't think there's an easy button.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely not an easy button. We do know if they've got maybe a board meeting coming up, we help them maybe with some data points that might be useful just from what's happening to other schools, maybe their area, their size, nationally or regionally even. We just try to really help them strengthen their position. Go ahead, Chris.
I think in some examples, like particularly in higher ed with the new GLBA requirements that are going to be pushed to higher ed, that may jumpstart some of these guys, right? So now they've got to do annual pen tests and they've got to do vulnerability scanning. And so we've tried to be proactive and incorporate that in our solution to make them GLBA compliant. But that's going to be something that all higher eds have to deal with, and it's fairly new. In the K-12 environment, there's a few websites that track cyber incidents. You mentioned, Carl, the fire's way off. Well, you don't hear about it, right? You hear about when somebody gets ransomware and it takes the whole environment down. That's what you hear about. You don't hear about the attacks where they go steal 20 teachers' paychecks and walk away with, $200,000 on a weekend. Those happen all the time. And there's a couple of sites that'll aggregate that up. And we've used that, if we're going to a particular location, we'll show it to them and say, hey guys, listen, you see all these attacks that are happening, right? It's not just you. This is an ongoing thing and you need to be aware of it and prepare for it.
Yeah,
so I think just supporting them with that data.
Yeah, I don't want to scare them, but sometimes you gotta take the wool over their eyes and go, there are bad people out there and they're trying to break in every single day.
Oh yeah, I like this, Phil. Cybersecurity as a service, CSAS. Yeah, for sure. and I see he's hiring now. So just like you were saying there, Fabio, getting somebody there that's on the ground that's going to help. But again, you still need a team from the day to day and everything else, right?
That's
It's
right.
more than just the
Yeah.
one person.
More than just the vision and the direction setting. It's also somebody on the grounds doing the work,
Yeah.
responding to those
Multiple.
incidents. Multiple
Right.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in some case, we're dealing with weekends, we're dealing with nights, we're dealing with holidays. It's really not realistic to think that one, even two or three on a team, can manage all that.
And I think that's the challenge too, because I think a lot of times when we're working with institutions, educators think, well, okay, I'll just let IT handle all that. And so, letting the one person kind of do everything is a dangerous way of thinking about it, when in fact, all of us should have some sort of shared ownership. If we're in the institution, if we're employee of the institution, we should be thinking about that, which leads me to this question. And I know Fabio's kind of talked about it a little bit, the importance of staff training there with teachers and administrative staff. So Fabio, thoughts on this? Again, we've heard, they're sending QR codes to you now. So, I mean, and there's the gotcha emails where we can, like the know before, we're like, oh, you clicked on the link and you weren't supposed to. I mean, there's lots of different ways to attack this. What are your thoughts on how to make everyone kind of aware of it, besides just like a 1 hour training once a year?
Right. And that's truly, besides that training, what we try to do, we actually try to get in front of our staff and in front of our faculty to be able, and we send out newsletter and just constantly remind them about these new emerging things. Because honestly, it seems like something new comes up every week, every day, and just keeping that awareness for what is actually currently going on. And the holidays are also the worst for that.
Right.
Because is this a legitimate, coupon email versus, a
Mm.
QR code that you can save 15% off of Amazon or something?
I got a UPS tracking phishing email today. I mean, they come in all the time, but particularly this time of year.
They know
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. It's just like the people driving through the neighborhood looking for packages on the porch, right? It's opportunity at this point. And when we're all
Right.
clicking and buying things and subscribing to things, and we don't realize, what exactly we picked up on.
Yeah. And you think IT, just to, even take that further, Carl, you think IT, all your holidays are published on the website. So they know when you're, when you're gone. So you really need to be vigilant.
Yeah, that's open information. Sebastian mentions here, there's a major lack of moderately skilled cybersecurity professionals, creating the demand. Oh yeah, for those positions. I think that's true. And then Gabriel says here, like, what's the vulnerability with this is an interesting one. And I see this more, I guess in a college environment, everyone's bringing their own, or you're providing some, right, Fabio?
Correct.
What does that look like when people are bringing their own devices on campus? Because then that opens up another kind of security threat. How do you manage all that?
And that's exactly it. What we need to do is to very much employ a zero trust model, and assume that everything that is connecting to our network that is not district owned is there to attack us. And that's
why you need that depth and defense, right? Because it's not just the endpoint, right? You can't just throw carbon black on it and call it a day. You've got to really protect it at each and every point in the MITRE chain, because they will get past certain things, right? So if we can build that depth and defense, even when they're at home, we can still moderate the risk and protect the environment.
Right. And one thing, what we end up actually doing here every time we make a presentation to our constituency, we explain security as an onion. It's multiple layers, and they are all overlapping, and one thing is not going to block. It's not going to make you safe. It's so many different layers of this that will ensure, and even then it will make you safer, or make it to where that actor is going to go to somebody else that it's easier to access.
Right. That awareness level, at least if nothing else, you just got a better awareness or better picture of what's actually happening, what threats are coming into your institution. This is the final question I want to give Chris and a couple of you a chance to answer this one here, because we only got about a couple minutes left. And it's funny because in pre-production we were talking about 5 to 10 years out, what are the things coming, and we all just kind of laughed. We're like, really, in this space, 6 to 18 months it's almost like dog years, right? It's like that's 5 to 10 years of real life when we talk about cybersecurity and all the things. And now we add in a layer of AI and what it can do with making those phishing emails look and sound even better, as I saw in the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. So curious, Chris, what are your thoughts on this? What's coming?
AI is scary, right? I mean, AI is going to do lots of great things. You mentioned the phishing emails. That's easy. When I was at RSA a few months back, I started looking into this, and there are published AI models that'll help you attack. You don't even have to know how to do it anymore. So it's like script kiddies
Yeah.
on steroids, and that's published and available. So I
Yep.
think we're going to see a huge uptick in that in the not too distant future. And folks are aware of that, right? They're building additional capabilities, and we're starting to leverage AI on the defense side. But I think they are absolutely going to get to it first, and it's going to be something that we end up reacting to. As much as we'd like to get in front of it, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, Fabio, what are you seeing? What do you think? Is AI the thing that we got to worry about the most? There's more, obviously there's other things at play here too. Humans still involved in all of this, of course.
Still, humans are still involved, and that's still, but I definitely AI is something that it is definitely I'm concerned about. I know my team is also concerned about, and we're actually trying to evaluate and see how we can use AI to help us and be able to help us prepare, right? And
Real quick,
also use that to attack ourselves
there
and
you
see how
go.
we can defend it.
Yeah,
I think AI is going to expand the volume. I mean, it's going to
Oh,
make
big
it more
time.
sophisticated, but I think really what you're going to see in the short term, Carl, is the number of attacks are going to go up greatly because now even the more sophisticated attacks, anybody with a computer and a little bit of time on their hands can go, figure out how to run it and feed the prompts into AI, and it helps them.
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing that it's one of those things, much like anything in technology, right? It can help us and it can hurt us.
Yep.
And in this case, it's much the same. And I love this kind of final point here by Sebastian, who talks about, making sure that staff and students understand this and the importance of this, as kids are coming into the workplace, as they're leaving Sierra College and going into the workplace, they too have to be worried about what's going on at home. Like, how are you protecting yourself at home too, right?
That's right. And to that, stop oversharing probably on social media. Maybe stop putting everything
Good luck
out
with
there
that.
because it will be used against you. There's articles even, that have just taken what parents are posting about their children, K-12 ages and being used against them in AIs with AI's help. So just being really aware of what you're putting out there, I would say.
Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way this morning because I'm an Eagles fan, and I had a bunch of people send me someone subscribed me to a bunch of Cowboys gear because now my inbox is spammed with those. But I won't get into that right now. I am in Texas, so I got to be careful what I say. But I want to thank Fabio, Chris, and Stephanie. Thank you all for joining us and being a part of this conversation, guys. This is a lot. I mean, there's a lot to this, and obviously, it takes a team effort. It takes a team in your institution, but it also takes a team outside of your institution working together. And I want to point out a quick resource because Stephanie and Chris mentioned this to me earlier. You guys have Guardian 365. Give us a quick 1 minute or less. What's this about?
Yeah, so Guardian 365 is really where technology meets people, right? So we come in and we help customers leverage their existing Microsoft solutions. We get everything deployed and configured for them, and then provide 24/7, 365 monitoring, pen testing, etc. All part of the same package. No hidden fees. We've got lots of great customers. Fabio being my absolute favorite customer, but it's been it's been great, and it's a game changer for a lot of these organizations. It's setup, it's configuration, it's monitoring, and it's that ongoing iteration that they struggle with on their own.
Fabio, we recorded that, so I'll make sure to put that on a loop.
Thank you.
I'll have AI
Yeah.
create some sort of digital
There you
postcard
go.
for you, Chris, saying that to you.
Use it for marketing material
That's right. Yeah.
or leverage on my end.
Sure.
There you go.
That's smart. Yeah, that's smart. All right. Well, I'm going to send these folks back off stage. Thank you again to Chris, Stephanie, and Fabio for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
A few other little things as we wrap up here. Again, thanks to Microsoft just for being a part of this conversation and kind of walking us through, the importance of a lot of this. Because I, again, as someone who's been in the field and even out of it for a couple of years, it's amazing how much it's just become more complex as we add in all these users and systems. You heard from our panelists today. Again, be sure to check out that Microsoft Digital Defense Report. It's pretty handy. I've gone through it a couple of times, found some different nuggets each time I've kind of looked through it. I think Chris mentioned kind of the overview it has, that kind of 10,000 foot view of what's going on in our space right now, not just in education, but also in business. And then finally, one quick thing. Next week, I'll be doing a part 2 of this segment. We'll be talking with someone in K-12 as well. And I'll be joined by Chris Stye, who's the Chief Technology Officer at eGroup Enabling Technologies. And so again, folding this into this conversation of cybersecurity and the ever-changing landscape is so important. So thank you guys so much. Thank you to those of you that are active on the chat there. Thank you, Matt. Everybody. Hey, there we go. Great chat. Appreciate it. Very active conversation as we all try to figure out how do we stay ahead of it all in the space of cybersecurity. Thank you, everybody.